Welcome back. I wanted to today talk about a question that a parent asked me recently. They heard I was teaching a class on C.S. Lewis, so they asked, "What can my younger boys be reading to prepare for your class?" And it's not so much about what they're reading as it is how they are reading. What is their experience with books, with words, with stories? I don't like the typical English class where you come in, you have a textbook full of partial stories or short stories or whatever, and you have a list of questions to judge comprehension, and then you pass if you know the plot and you can name the characters and basically just prove that you read it. And then as the kids get older, the teachers will start to ask you, ask the students to write a paper on the theme of the work or something like that. I I don't like approaching stories as if they were things that with component parts like you have the you have the characters, you have the plot. Can you map out the plot? What's the theme? What was the big thing that the author had in mind? Um, I remember hearing about a question on the SAT where you had to read this poem and then you had to choose the theme. It wasn't like write an essay about it. It was select the right answer. What did the author intend by this? And then there were a series of statements. And the author of that poem, I think she lives in Texas or lived in Texas at the time, and in the article, she was saying that she heard about the question and then she saw the question and she saw the answers and she's like, "That's not what I meant at all. Like that's not it." So most authors, and C.S. Lewis talks about this. When people would write to him and say, "I loved what you meant by this and how you said this," and C.S. Lewis was surprised. He's like, "Wow, maybe I did mean that." I mean, I didn't mean that, but I'm glad it was meant, and that you got caught that meaning. And the reason that's so is that we all participate in the Logos. We were created in the image of the Logos. When we use language, we are creating something, just like God the Father did when He spoke the Logos, and the Logos speaking created all that is. You see that in John 1 and Genesis 1. And we are participating in that same kind of process when we communicate, when we do language, whether written or spoken or whatever. And because we participate in the Logos and we're using things that are true about the world, and not necessarily in the elements or trappings of the story, like you can write science fiction and it's not going to be like technically true, or fantasy and it's not going to be like technically literally true, but it participates in the laws of nature, in God's moral law, in just the way things are. And so there's going to be a resonance. And because all of those things are connected, because the Logos created them all, and in Him they consist, they hold together. In Him we live and move and have our being. So does everything that lives and moves. It has their being in Christ, in the Logos. And so there is a great participation happening in all of life, in all the art that we consume or enjoy, I should say, in the books that we read and in the things that we write. And so a really good author who's really in tune with the world and with nature and being and the way things are, they will be able to write something about just an experience of chopping wood with your dad or whatever. And there will be things that happen in there that he saw fit to put in there for the purpose of moving the plot along, or developing some kind of character, shows some character trait in the dad or the son or both. And but because that author is so full of comprehension of the way the world is, we all enter into that, and we will see things that, from our experience, there are connections that are made that the author never would have made, but they're true connections. They're true moments of revelation. And so Lewis said, I didn't mean that at the time. I don't know what the theme is. I didn't have a theme. I was just writing a story, that kind of thing. And if you most authors that are good and that are well known, if you were to ask them about their theme, they would not know typically up front while they're writing. They didn't pick out a theme ahead of time. So anyway, when reading, is the child open? Are you open? As adults too, are you open to those moments, those experiences where you realize that yes, you're participating in the story, you're reading it, you're enjoying it, but you're also participating in reality, and you're making connections between the thing in the story and the thing throughout all of the rest of life. And so for my students, I like to use this analogy that J.R.R. Tolkien used when he gave an address called The Monsters and the Critics. He was talking about Beowulf, and he looked around and he saw all of the critics who were analyzing Beowulf, and he realized they were doing it all wrong. They were dissecting the story, they were looking for like geographical clues, historical clues. They were trying to like fit it into the history of this people or that people. And Tolkien said, imagine this. Imagine there's this small village. It's close to the sea, and on the edge of on the edge of the land, right overlooking the sea, there is this stone tower, a beautiful tower, and a little bit dilapidated, but beautiful nonetheless. And maybe because it's dilapidated. But you have all of these scientists who want to come and figure out the meaning of the tower. What's the theme? What's it all about? And so what do? They start to like chip away at bits of the mortar, and they take chunks of the stones. They analyze all of this. They send it to the lab to try to figure out where it came from, and they find out all this information. And by the time they're done, there's no tower left because they've dissected it. They've pulled it apart to figure out what it is and what it's for. But if they 10 years earlier, like the 10-year-old boy who was on a walk, saw it and was intrigued by it, climbed the tower and looked out, they would have known everything they needed to know about why the tower exists. It exists for that experience of climbing to the top of it and looking out. That's the meaning. And Tolkien was urging people to get back to just reading Beowulf. Just read it. It's a story. There's meaning there. There's truth and goodness and beauty there. So just read it. So when it comes to what should my child be reading or how should my child be reading, my own opinion, and I think Lewis would agree with this, would have agreed with this. When you start to dissect a book, you start to dissect it like a scientist, like a frog in science class. What do you end up with? You end up with a dead frog in science. You end up with a dead book. You kill the book by dissecting it. So the more natural way is to just read it, talk about it, ask your kids what was it about? Tell me all about it. What was your favorite part? And just talk to them about it. And if you've read the book, which I hope you have, with whatever your kids are reading, you would be able to also guide the conversation and point out things and start to get their mind thinking in terms of, wow, this thing in the story tells me something about the rest of the world. So as you read, find those tower moments. I encouraged my students as they read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to look for those tower moments and just write a paper telling me about it. Like what was so good, and what was the analogy? What was the metaphor? What was the meaning of that part of the story? And one of the better papers that I had was pointing out, and I hadn't thought of this before, but early in the story, Edmund, at the witch's castle, Edmund sees a stone lion, and because he's already kind of like mad at Aslan, he's got these bitter feelings because he wanted the Turkish delight rather than the glory of establishing the Narnian kingdom. Edmund drew a mustache on the stone lion. Now, after Aslan, they win the battle, they go back to the witch's castle, he goes through and he breathes on the stone animals, and they come back to life. And in the Bible, we're told that God takes our hearts of stone and turns them into hearts of flesh. He gives us that breath of life, just like he did when he breathed into Adam and he gave him first life. When that stone lion came back, he didn't have this painted mustache on his, uh, on his snout. And the student said that just hit me that when Christ gives us our heart of flesh and takes our heart of stone and turns it into flesh, he gives us new life. He remakes us. We're a new creation, and all of those things that we've done in the past, all of our sins, all of our all our failures, everything, like that mustache, they're gone. And Lewis doesn't even mention it. She was like, "Did he forget?" And then she said, "No, I think he may have done it on purpose because he wanted to convey that very subtly, wanted to convey that even God doesn't mention those things. They're removed as far as the east is from the west." And so, for her, that was a tower moment where she climbed up just in the middle of the story. She climbed up into that tower, and she looks out and she sees this beautiful thing. Those moments are, I think, absolutely destroyed when we have our children do like worksheets to ask them questions and quiz them and do all this stuff. I understand that's kind of a remedial thing if they're not a good reader, or they don't like reading and they maybe are prone to not reading when they're given something to read. But that whole thing goes against my whole philosophy of education. As a teacher, I need to love my students and I need to love my subject. And most importantly, I need to love my subject in the presence of my students. And so part of the thing, or part of getting your kids to love just reading is to read. Read to them when they're very little. Let them see you reading. When they want to come and talk your leg off, it's okay to say, "Just a sec, let me finish this chapter because this is really good." Because that communicates to them that it's okay to put other things off and say, "I'm going to finish this because this is really good." It tells them that there are really good things in books. And so many of those things are, they're more caught than they're taught. You've heard that before. And what that really means is they are your little disciples, parents. They are going to follow in your footsteps. They're going to be like you. They're going to do what you do. So if you are doing what do you want them to be doing? Model it. You have to be doing it. You have to be loving it. And if you love books in their presence, they will also catch that love. I love The Lord of the Rings. I love C.S. Lewis. I love Narnia. And so I love those things in my kids' presence. I read, bits of poetry from The Lord of the Rings to my children, and I help them memorize parts of, bits of the poetry, and they catch that. It's infectious. So what should your kids be reading? Good stuff. Good stuff. Heroic tales. I think G.K. Chesterton said that fairy tales don't exist to inform us that dragons exist, or anything like that in a literal way. They exist to show us and to remind us that, yeah, there are terrible things in the world, those dragons, and they can be slain. They can be defeated. So have them read good things that show them how they can overcome the evil things in the world. Have them read things that deal truly with evil. Not evil of like, I remember these books when I was younger, my sisters would read, where it's like, "Oh, I'm not popular. Oh man, it's going to be a bad year at school." And then somehow she becomes popular, and that's the story. And I'm like, "Oh man, that's trash." So what they read, I think good stuff. How to read with joy, with eagerness, with a kind of obsession is really, and all learning is best done when you're obsessed with the thing. Think back to anything that you have mastered, that you have conquered, in terms of a field of knowledge or whatever that you've become proficient at, and people look to you and they say, "Oh man, he, that guy is great at building houses." That lady, she's awesome at that instrument. Or look at the stuff that she's able to sew or whatever. Well, how did y'all get good at that? You got good at it not by filling out a worksheet that you were assigned by a teacher who didn't care about the subject. No, you became good, proficient, excellent at that thing because you fell in love with it and you became obsessive about it. You watched hours and hours of videos. You know, the story that you know best and you love best. You read it 50 times by the time you were 12. So it's okay to let your children read. You know, they find a book, The Lord of the Rings. My 10-year-old has read it probably 30 times and listened to it that many times as well. Why? Because he's obsessed with all of it. He loves it. He absolutely loves it. And we never step in and say, either, here's a worksheet on The Lord of the Rings. Prove to me that you're really understanding the meaning of the story. No, we don't do that. That would absolutely kill it. Nor do we ever say, you're reading too much. You've read that too many times. You need to put that down. Because those habits of going, whole hog, 100%, obsessively into that thing, they are practicing how they are going to be later in life when they start to, really study theology, or they start to study engineering, or whatever the job is that they're going to be doing, or the career, or the side hustle. They're going to be interested in that, and they're going to be obsessive about it, and they're going to excel and develop and demonstrate competence because of that obsession, because of that going back and back and back and doing it over and over and over again. So that's what your students should be reading. That's how they should be reading. That's how we should be reading.